It's the Brian Lehrer Show on WNYC. I'm Kusha Navidar. I'm filling in for Brian. Let's turn now to grocery stores and SNAP benefits. Food insecurity continues to challenge our city with a citywide rate of about 1 in every 6 people, according to a report from the Mayor's Office of Food Policy. In some reports, it's as high as 1 in 5 people. A key proposal of the mayor's campaign, grocery stores run by the city. On Monday, city officials announced updates to the plan, including that these stores will offer meat, seafood, and produce 30% cheaper than other retail stores. The plan to open 5 subsidized stores is in motion, with the city opening a request for proposal, which means private grocers can now apply to help run these stores. One response from local small businesses has been that the subsidized stores could put local bodegas and grocers in jeopardy. Some are saying maybe out of business. We're going to get into that and into all the latest from Monday's announcement and what it means moving forward for affordable food for our city. We're also then going to hear the latest about another food issue of food insecurity in New York. I'm talking about SNAP benefits and how many folks have lost them recently. In June, more than 22,000 New Yorkers lost their monthly SNAP food benefits. This is the result of new qualification rules by the Trump administration. So we'll get into those changes, what they mean, and how city-run grocery stores will contribute to the reality many are trying to navigate of affording life in New York. So here to walk us through all of it is Karen Yee, reporter for Gothamist, who's been covering these stories. Welcome, Karen.
Hey, Kusha. Good to be here.
Good to have you here. Listeners, we're taking your calls, too. Are you looking forward to city-run grocery stores? Why or why not? I'd be especially interested to hear from anyone who owns or works in the world of bodegas and grocery stores. What do you think about how the plan is developing? The number is 212-433-WNYC. That's 212-433-9692. Later on in this segment, we'll also take your calls about SNAP benefits, and I'd love to hear from someone who's had to navigate the changes to SNAP since June. How's it going for you? Do you have questions for our guest, reporter Karen Yee? Call or text us. 212-433-WNYC. Okay, Karen, let's start with grocery stores. On Monday, Mayor Mamdani and city officials had a press conference. What were the big announcements?
So the mayor went to the Campaign Against Hunger. This is an anti-hunger group based in East New York. And it was at their warehouse. They're kind of a food distributor. And, you know, he was in front of a bunch of stalls of food and even held up some bananas at some point. And the big news was what you said, right? His municipal grocery stores will offer a 30% discount on what he's calling a core group of items. And that includes meat, seafood, fresh produce, and other pantry staples. And the other thing he announced was that the city was looking for a partner in this to do a sort of private-public partnership to operate these stores. So the city's going to put down, they're going to cover some of the expenses, rent and property taxes, and the private operator is going to run the day-to-day operations of the actual store, which is their specialty. So they opened up the RFP process, and sort of the big tagline of his grocery store is going to be 30% off of basic items.
So I hear 2 big things there. One, 30% off core group things, not everything, but some core staples. Mm-hmm. And then the second from the press conference, a public-private partnership of who's covering what costs. The city will cover, you mentioned real estate, you mentioned taxes, and then the private partner there that are now allowed to apply will cover everything else. Did I get all of that?
Yes, and I think what was interesting about that is sort of how the city is sort of envisioning their role and that how they're bringing in the experts, which are the grocers, right? Because the city is not in the business of running a grocery store. It's a tricky business. It involves supply chains. And
refrigerators.
Yes, refrigerators, storage, knowing what to buy. And so they're really going to leverage the private operator here to actually use their existing contracts with distributors, their knowledge of the supply chain to determine, where they're even going to source this food from. And they're also going to be in charge of staff staffing and training up their staff.
Okay. So let's dive into each of those separately. The first thing I wanted to ask was just, were you at the press conference?
Yes, I was there.
What was the vibe?
It was, I think, if you've been to a Mamdani press conference, it's very similar. It's, very celebratory. It's very exciting. You had a lot of emergency food advocates there, really looking for anything that will bring relief to the emergency food crisis and food affordability that we're seeing play out on a large scale. Food pantry operators are just seeing really, really enormous lines, and that is going to get worse as we think about the people who are going to lose SNAP. And so they, I think, are excited for anything that will bring a little bit of relief to people's pockets. You also had local unions there because, what the Deputy Mayor for Economic Justice has said is that, yes, we are bringing relief to the pockets of consumers. Regardless of what you make, anybody can show up at these stores. But we are also doing that by creating high-paying jobs. The workers that they're going to hire at these stores are going to be receiving what they call family-sustaining wages. What that means, how much above minimum wage, if it's above minimum wage, I'm not sure. That's what they called it. In the RFP, you could see that they're also going to be giving out health benefits for these positions from anywhere from, the person bringing up your groceries to the person stocking up the food on your shelves.
Is the idea that is the responsibility of the private operator to set first, let me back up here a little bit. 30% doesn't apply to everything. It applies to meat, seafood, and produce, right?
And pantry staples.
Pantry staples, thank you, sorry. So who is setting the prices there? Is it the private operator or is it the city?
The way it's going to work is, if you go to a grocery store, you'll maybe find a carton of raspberries for $7.99. The next day it'll be maybe $5.99. And then one week it'll be $9.99, right? And it'll fluctuate. And sometimes it'll fluctuate by day. The idea of these stores is that every month, either whether it's one private operator or several running these 5 stores, will set the prices for these items for the entire month. So those prices will not fluctuate at the cash register. They won't fluctuate by week. And it is going to be the private operator who is determining these prices 30% off of what, right? 30% discounted from quote unquote average retail price.
Got it. So it's like, you can expect to find these category of goods to most likely for the whole month be 30% less than what you would find on average at another private retail.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And then you had mentioned about these, what was the term used? Family sustaining wages.
Yes.
Whose responsibility is that? The private side or the public side?
So in the RFP, there are specifications. This is the request for proposals seeking sort of bids for who's going to run these stores. There is language around how much are you going to pay your staff? And so I do think that's going to fall on the operator. And I think this is where things get a little bit murky for me. The city has committed to paying the rent for these locations and the taxes. And, that is some of the higher expenses from grocers. When I've spoken to grocers and bodega owners, they say, look, all my money goes toward rent. It's really expensive here, and taxes, but it also goes toward payroll. Payroll is another big expense. What the city is trying to do, and you could see sort of in the language in the RFP, is they're saying, give us a proposal for how you'll be able to achieve this 30% discount, and will you need an additional affordability subsidy, right, to sort of make it work, and what will that look like? And so I think the sort of the fine tuning of the economics of this model will really be determined based on who the operator is and who gets this bid, or multiple operators.
That's super helpful for me to hear because I was trying to parse that through as well, even going to the Gov website yesterday and trying to read a little bit of the RFP. So thanks for explaining that. Folks, we have Karen Yee here from Gothamist talking about first city-run grocery stores, the plan for them. A big press conference happened on Monday with new updates to that plan. And then also later on, SNAP benefits. Karen, we've got some callers coming in. Let's take one of them. Chris from the Bronx. Hey, Chris, welcome to the show.
Hey, everybody. Thanks for having me. It was just reported recently in the last couple of days that there is one grocery operator in the city that is suing the Mamdani administration for creating these city-run grocery stores. And I find this really interesting because these are the same people that just recently were promoters of the free market, and anyone can come in the market, and that's what's so great about capitalism. And what I find interesting and cool about democratic socialism is that they take the mistakes and successes of past socialism. And in past socialism, there has been expropriation of business without compensation. There's been expropriation with compensation. What democratic socialism is doing is going into the market and competing with these private companies, and hopefully they can survive. But that's how it works. This has worked in China. In China, food is subsidized. It's very affordable. This is not a new idea. It doesn't cause hyperinflation. It works for those people. And I mean, and the last point I want to make is that I would like to see how much worker control these city-run grocery stores are. The real Marxist version of socialism is a worker control. It's not a top-down, totalitarian state-owned thing. It's when the workers really own the means of production and have control over the workplace. So let's see if these workplaces are unionized. Let's see if workers have a say in these workplaces, and let's see if this can really become a successful experiment.
Thank you so much for that call. You packed a lot into there. I want to point out another text that we had come through that echoed Chris's hope, I would say, or just his last point there about unionization. Karen, any sense of what Chris was mentioning at the end about how much worker control there would be within these stores? I mean, I think it's pretty far down the path before then, but what are your thoughts there?
Yes. So the first store, just for context, is going to open toward the later half of 2027. And I do think like a key piece of this that will answer a lot of questions will be who the operator will be. There's going to be 5 stores, 1 in each borough. We only know the locations for 2 of them, which is the one in Manhattan, which will be in East Harlem, and the one in the Bronx. They're still looking for locations in the other boroughs. And, what the city has sort of left it vague. They've said family sustaining wages, as we've talked about. But they did have union representatives at this press conference. And in the RFP, you do see some language about, how much are you going to pay your workers? Will there be an opportunity for maybe a co-op style, right? Like worker ownership. And so the city is thinking about this, but I do think a lot of it will hinge upon who the provider who actually gets the contract or the providers who get this contract are and sort of what their relationships are with their workforce. That
makes sense. Let's go to Kate in Queens. Hey, Kate, welcome to the show.
Yeah, hi. I was just trying to keep it simple, that this program is supposed to make food available to people who need it, especially in view of the food stamps being cut back. Okay, so how do we get so complicated now? And how do we, saying about the workers and everything else? And how do we make sure that it's the needy people that actually have a chance to buy the food there? Because from my understanding of life, the store opens at 9 o'clock, and by 9:30, all the people who are thrifty and sharpies, they're there and clean the place out. So how do you make sure that it has to be open to everybody, as I understand? So how do you do this? And you mentioned about a cooperative staffing. This is on the positive side, a cooperative type of operation where the workers work there. There is and has been for many years a successful cooperative. I think it's farm products in Brooklyn. And basically they get cheaper prices because they contribute their labor to it. But, I mean, that's aside from the initial problem of making sure that it gets to the low-priced food gets to the people who need it.
Kate, thank you so much for that call. What I hear Kate saying, Karen, maybe you have a thought about this, is let's go back to first principles. How do we make sure that the purpose of the store to help those who need support get affordable food? How do we make sure that actually happens?
Well, I think that's the sort of the thinking behind location. The first store in the Bronx is going to open at this place called La Peninsula, and it's like sort of an affordable housing development complex, and it is in the Hunts Point section of the Bronx, right? There's really high rates of food insecurity there, really high rates of people receiving SNAP there. So a lot of it is just going to be where these stores are placed. The location in Manhattan is at La Marqueta in East Harlem, another area where there's also high needs. A lot of people spending a lot more on their food and relying on SNAP. But it is going to be up to the provider to make sure that, like the caller said, the shelves aren't completely clean by noon, or, people actually have access to this as well as it just being there in the community.
We had a text that came through saying, why would a private grocer want to go and do this? Have you talked to private grocers at all about this dynamic? I mean, were there any at the press conference either?
I didn't see any at the press conference. They might have been there. But I have spoken to private grocers about the concept of municipal grocery stores. I think it will be interesting to see who will bid on this.
Yeah.
And, I think their concern is the competition. New York is a very interesting marketplace for grocery stores. I think unlike other parts of the country, there is no one retailer that owns a market share, right? So if you think of other states, Walmart owns like a majority of the stores in the state. In New York, no grocer, no operator owns more than 10% of the grocery stores here.
Interesting.
So it's actually a really competitive market.
Yeah.
You have, I think it's like 10,000 bodegas, more than 1,000 grocery stores across the 5 boroughs. And what they're worried about is if you open up a municipal store in their neighborhood, that's going to sort of siphon off customers from their stores. And they, will either maybe have to close, will either have to raise their prices to stay open. And if they raise prices, customers will leave. So there's really concern about what it's going to do to their business. Grocery stores are not a high profit industry. They make 1% to 3% profit margin. And if you are in a low income neighborhood, grocers have told me it's even less. It's even less than 1%. And there's an interesting intersection here when we're talking about the economy, the economics of a grocery store and their revenue. A lot of their revenue actually comes from SNAP, because what SNAP is essentially money. It's money that people can only really spend on grocery stores and bodegas. And so if you have in low-income communities, in Hunts Point, I spoke to grocers in the South Bronx, 80% of the revenue is coming from SNAP. So if you are losing some of your customer base because there's a new competitor in town, plus you're losing some of your customer base because they're losing their money, they're losing your SNAP benefits, that's going to affect your bottom line.
I want to talk about the economics behind this a little bit, because we have some folks texting about that. So the idea is that the private operators can translate the fewer fixed costs that they have, like they don't have to pay for rent, they don't have to pay for taxes, and translate those savings into lower prices for the consumer. Am I getting the microeconomics model right there?
Yes, that's correct. So the city is going to sort of offload rent and taxes, and then the operator is going to come in and provide the rest. But the question is what the city is covering rent and taxes, is that going to be enough? Right, for these grocers to not just operate a business as they normally would, but to actually sell some products, core products, at a 30% discount. And so I do think there's going to have to be, or probably, some sort of additional subsidy coming from the city to help offset these costs. If you're going to promise to consistently provide every month this 30% discount, right? The city has already committed itself to this 30% discount. And, what grocers tell me that is expensive is insurance is also expensive and payroll is also expensive. And like we've been talking about, they're committing to these family-sustaining wages. And then the other thing about grocery stores is so many things about prices are out of their control. Think about how much we were paying for eggs.
Right.
Couple years early last year, right? That had to do with the bird flu epidemic and sort of flocks dying, and that's what that raised prices. We see beef prices really increasing because it's getting more expensive to feed cattle, so people have smaller herds, and so that raises up prices. Then you see the war in Iran, that's raising up gas prices. Higher gas prices means higher transportation costs, which increases every single part of the supply chain. There are so many middlemen in this business that touch your product as it moves along from grower all the way to your shelf, and everyone's taking their cut and everyone's taking their share. If something along the line goes up, if any price goes up, that sort of trickles down to you as the consumer. So all of these things are out of the control of the city and of the grocer, and has to be factored in as well.
Let's go to Anthony in Staten Island. Hey, Anthony, welcome to the show.
Hi, thanks for taking my call. I'm a long-time listener and a long-time disagreeer.
It's great to have you here.
This whole project has all the earmarkings of a classic boondoggle. I mean, you start out by saying we're going to forgive your taxes and we're going to forgive your rent. So basically, what they're saying is, if government, the fees that government collects, would get out of the way, your products would be cheaper. So right away, there's an indication that government is often the problem in raising the costs on anything. The second thing is, they didn't even know how to run a grocery store, so they have to go to a private sector fellow who has the expertise from experience, who's been out there in the real public arena and knows how to run a grocery store. So and then the other caveat, 30% off of what? I don't even know what the yardstick is. 30% off of a few items, the core items.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, this is. I can't wait to see what the prices are. I'm a chronic grocery shopper, and ShopRite has sales. Western Beef has sales. Lidl has sales. I don't know how much cheaper you can get than what those venues have as prices for many of their core items. So I really see this as just a publicity stunt. I mean, Mamdani may as well get into a chariot and drive through these neighborhoods and dispense gold coins, because this is nonsense. This is really nonsense.
Anthony, Anthony, we'll have to pause you there just for time, but thank you so much. Really valuable to hear your perspective on what I hear you saying is it's not free market. They can't do it themselves anyway. They need outside expertise, talking about the city government there. And also, how much cheaper can you get? Now, Karen, we talked a lot about those topics. Is there anything that you wanted to contribute to Anthony's perspective there?
Yeah, I think Anthony is echoing what I've heard from some grocers who are saying, if you want groceries to be cheaper for consumers, for New Yorkers, right? That's ultimately the goal of this, affordability. Why not use us? We have existing stores. We have existing infrastructure. Why not give us a subsidy that we can then pass on to the customer? And I think that's, I asked the mayor if they're looking at other solutions to this. And, the mayor talked about ways that they're making it easier for small businesses to operate. But this is sort of the plan, right? They're spending $70 million in capital improvement in the location in La Marqueta in East Harlem. They're actually going to build a grocery store. And so I don't know. I do think this is something that hasn't been tried at this scale. While there are subsidized markets that do exist already in New York City, I think the scale is a little bit different. And we've seen these municipal grocery stores in other states like Kansas and Florida that haven't worked because they couldn't keep their customers. And so to Anthony's point, he said he's a chronic shopper. I think a lot of New Yorkers are chronic shoppers. They know where to go for the best deals, and they will shop and they will wait and they will travel. And part of what needs to happen here, I think, for this to be successful is you need to maintain a strong customer base. A lot of these grocery stores operate on volume. They need to sell things quickly and turn things over to make a profit to stay sustainable, because they're not making much off of individual goods. So it needs to be something that is functional and that is cheap enough and worth it for the community to come, I think, for this model to work.
So let's shift gears a little bit. These city-run grocery stores, just like many other stores around the country, will accept SNAP benefits. We're going to shift to those benefits right now, which help many people in this city afford food. In 2024, SNAP benefits supported about 1 out of every 5 city residents. That's nearly 1.8 million people. About a year ago, the Trump administration changed the qualifications for who gets SNAP benefits, and those new rules went into effect in June, so a month ago. And as a result, about 22,000 people of that 1.8 million lost their benefits. Karen, what exactly did the Trump administration change about SNAP qualifications?
SNAP is a federal entitlement program. It dates back to the Great Depression, and it's really a monthly stipend for families to use it in grocery stores. And SNAP has always had some sort of work requirement, but what Congress passed, and it was sort of pushed through by congressional Republicans, was expanding those requirements to include more people, and then for states that had a waiver. New York had a waiver for a long time because of high unemployment rate here, rescind those waivers earlier. And the goal of Republicans in the Trump administration was really to encourage people to go back to work and to cut out waste, fraud, and abuse.
Okay.
And so these requirements, New York hasn't had to do them in a long time, and now you have homeless people aging out of foster care, veterans having to, for the first time, have to comply. And what's interesting about how this has played out in New York City specifically is the people that are being most affected are actually young adults. The people that have been kicked off, 22,000, in just the first month alone. This is going to be a rolling number. Every month, more and more people are going to get kicked off, because it is not just working. It is proving consistently that you are working.
Oh, so 1 month you're not working, you will lose those benefits.
You have a 3-month grace period that can be
Okay.
consecutive or sort of in different months.
Got it.
And that's why the rules actually took effect in March, and that's why you start seeing people get kicked off in June, because that's when the grace period expires. And what we're seeing is actually young adults and young men specifically really losing out on their benefits. And I think that's partly because, they're healthier. Maybe they don't have a medical or a disability exemption. And the city has really been working furiously to exempt people from these rules who can be exempted. I think the concern here was, you have to prove that you're working until you're 64 years old. So what if you're a senior that already retired?
Right.
What does that mean?
Yeah.
You could also volunteer, or you could also be in school. But that's the core group of people who are being affected. It's about 31,000 in New Jersey. Their rules, they're on a different timeline. It's a little bit wonky, but so far 31,000 in New Jersey. And so that's going to continue to spiral and grow as more people fall off the rolls.
So if this is hitting, I think the stat was 18 to 35-year-olds especially. Did I get that right? Yeah. So if the qualification requirement is for an adult to work and it's hitting that demographic especially hard, what happens in situations with when a family with children, for instance, and the adult doesn't qualify? Does the child also lose their SNAP benefits?
There are some situations where it's sort of a partial loss, right? Where the adult will lose their benefit, but the household, obviously children are exempt from this. It's able-bodied people from 18 to 64. So some SNAP cases aren't being fully closed, but the benefit is being reduced. And just to remind you of what the benefit is, it's an average of $6 a day, $187 a month. And so for most people who are receiving SNAP, it's still not enough to cover your monthly groceries.
It's a supplement.
Yeah, it's a supplement. And so in many cases, families are already relying on pantries to patch through the month. And what pantries are telling me is now, they're coming more often, or they're relying on more pantries, or they're dispatching an older child further out of the neighborhood to go to another pantry to help bring food home. So it's kind of feeling like it felt in the pandemic, right, where there was just much more need and much more demand for food.
The clock is winding down, and there's so much to cover here. But the last question that I wanted to ask you about is, because you had mentioned you're expecting more to lose their benefits as this rolls forward. And I'm thinking about the job market right now with low-wage sectors where SNAP beneficiaries might be seeking employment. And I'd call that portion of the labor market like high employment, but high volatility too, month to month. So do you have any sense of what direction that 22,000 number is going to go in the coming month and year?
You mean if it's going to keep growing?
Keep growing?
Yeah, I think the city expects that number to be growing, because this is something that city officials also have to consistently work at and consistently process all this documentation on a rolling basis. And I think they're also, what the city is looking at is whether there's an opportunity here for workforce development, looking at young people who, maybe can't find work or maybe want more stable jobs, and how can they help them both keep their benefits and come back on, and also find some sort of career and some sort of fulfillment. But I do think work consistency is key. One example I'll give you is if you're a home health aide and your patient is in the hospital, you're not working for those weeks. So maybe you lose your benefits temporarily. So I think there is going to be a lot of turning on and turning off of cases and benefits.
Oh, man, that sounds hard. Well, we appreciate you so much coming in, tracking all of this, explaining it to us. We'll have to leave it there for now with Karen Yee, reporter at The Gothamist. Thank you, Karen.
Thank you.
WNYC's journalism and storytelling is heard by millions of passionate listeners. Sponsors of our programming gain our listeners' attention and their respect. Learn about how your organization can support WNYC and WNYC Studios at sponsorship.wnyc.org.